just a little bit. Because we're back. We are live. We promised we would go live, and let's just make sure at least someone pops on. I'll wait till someone pops on. But I'll also get the questions up on my computer because I'm learning from experience how to make this better, how to streamline this more. Just want to make sure this is. Oh, we have one like. Maybe.
I'm gonna just get.
Okay, I think we have one person watching, which means that this is probably working. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up the live stream. Okay, we have one hello from a Tesla bot. We have some people signing on.
Hello, Tesla bot.
Sorry that it is so late right now, but you know what? Better late than never. We had to go get some Indian food, so, you know, sorry.
But in our defense, we resisted the ice cream.
Yes, we did. Thought you were going to bring up the other thing.
Oh, yeah,
okay. All right, so I'm just pulling up the questions. Hello, everyone. Maybe good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. But we have a special treat because we have round 2 of live interviews with
Ask Jonathan Anything.
Yes, Ask Jonathan Anything. We thought that we'd go over some current events. But so I guess, okay, cool. We have some Australia checking in, which is maybe the perfect introduction to talking about the sort of light show over Australia and what that was all about.
Absolutely. And so yesterday, the Russian space agency launched a navigation satellite from their Arctic cosmodrome in Plesetsk. And that was heading southeast, and it went over Australia. And the third stage of the rocket, the Block E stage, was put on just a slightly suborbital trajectory, perigee in the atmosphere, so that it would dispose of itself in a targeted location. And that targeted location this time around was just southeast of Tasmania.
Okay, so Marcus House would know all about that.
Yeah.
He lives in Tasmania.
And so people in Melbourne, people in southeastern Australia and Victoria, and people in Tasmania saw this big flaming 2-ton thing go overhead at an altitude of about 60 kilometers.
Wow.
And it splashed in the ocean. Now, they've done this before, but normally the splash area has been a bit further south, further from Australia.
Okay.
And this one is the closest they've been to actually the mainland. And so,
so no room for error.
No room for error. And that is because their new navigation satellite is like heavier than the earlier model. And so the rocket was like struggling a bit to get it into orbit, I guess, and it couldn't quite clear Tasmania as clean.
Right.
So and it went over, it went over Australia about midnight, but a lot of people saw this in the sky. So I guess the Aussies are out partying at midnight in Melbourne a lot.
Hard to miss.
Yeah. So it was like right along the track that we'd predicted, right heading for the re-entry zone that they'd announced. And so there's no question that the thing they saw in the sky was this Soyuz rocket stage.
Well, I feel like this is a good glimpse into the life of Jonathan because you said a couple news outlets reached out to you about this.
Yeah, I had like ABC News and so on. We're trying to find out what this is, and various friends on Twitter, followers on Twitter, were asking, I saw this thing. Let's ask Planet 4589. And so, it took me like 5 seconds to figure out what it was. So,
Gotcha.
so that's a pretty common occurrence,
right?
Because even today, people are not used to seeing these things in the sky from any one location. But, it happens like every few weeks somewhere in the world.
Right.
And every time it's like, oh, what's that in the sky? And so I get to figure out what it is.
Well, we do have quite a few people checking in, so thanks for staying up late with us or wherever you are. Jonathan McDowell, do you think we'll find a true LK99 with superconductor-like facets?
I have no idea what that means.
I guess he's talking about.
Are you talking about if you're talking about the room temperature superconductor that the South Koreans claim they've made? I'm skeptical.
We're skeptical.
Yeah. I'm. It might be right, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that one.
Okay, so I'm going to look up a news article while you answer this question. How much would you like to look inside the event horizon of a black hole at the singularity?
Not even a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Because if you can do that, then you're not getting out again. And I actually quite like, I don't, spaghettification is not my favorite way to die.
Oh, live a little. Come on.
And so, well, that's the point. If you're at that point, you can see the singularity, and you're inside the event horizon. Then you're not going to live a little, or you're going to live a very little. So no, I think thanks all the same, but I think I'll pass.
Well, back to maybe some current events. We know that the Artemis crew met their moonship today. So, but we also heard that there may be a change of plans. So I'm trying to find so I can quote it accurately.
Yeah. So what I'm understanding from what Ellie told me is that the NASA has sort of, and SpaceX has sort of finally realized that they ain't going to have a lander by 2025, which everyone else like twigged several years ago that was just not going to happen, and so they go, okay, well, we're building this SLS booster. We should use it, even though we're not we might as well. The rate we're producing the boosters, we'll have another one by the time the lander's ready.
Right.
So let's use the Artemis 3 one for something.
Yes.
Instead of just sitting on our rear ends for another few years. And so what are you going to do with that mission? And I haven't read today's story, but some of the things I've heard so far suggesting, we'll have launched the first modules of the Gateway station by then. They're orbiting the moon with no one in them. And so maybe you send some astronauts to outfit the Gateway station and get it up and running.
Right.
And that would be, pardon me, that would be a sensible Artemis 3 mission to do that you could imagine actually doing in 2025, unlike landing people on the surface of the moon, which, I'm sorry, ain't going to happen on that time scale.
No. And while you grab a drink, someone asked, Mark wants to know how my leg is. I think my leg for 5 months in surgery is doing pretty well, and I mean,
she's bopping around Boston today like nobody's business.
I'm
really
walk.
Impressed by how you've recovered.
Yeah, it doesn't. You wouldn't think I had surgery on my
absolutely not.
rod put in my leg.
Some impressive scars, which we're not going to show, but
doing pretty good.
But doing pretty. Yeah, I'm impressed.
Good.
You're doing great.
Good. Well, I appreciate people asking and caring.
And how much of that do you think is the physical therapy and?
I stopped going to physical therapy May 30th when I allegedly tore my hip labrum, so I've been doing my own. I've just been really pushing myself enough. I think it's important
that's the key.
in recovery, right? Because your muscles atrophy so easily. At some point, you got to step it up and you got to build them back.
See, that's what I would be really bad at.
I think some people it might take a really
Ellie's
long time.
such a jock. I'm just such a couch potato, and so she's in a much better position to recover from something like that.
I did drive quite far in the rain this morning to go to the gym, so even on vacation, I try to work out. So someone wants to know, did I miss Jonathan's top 5 book list? And you did not. We did not go over that.
Oh, geez. Top 5 book list.
Might be criminal to ask you, but...
was this in the context of like science fiction books or just general books?
I think any book you want.
Any book I want.
Top 5.
Top 5. Ooh, I'd need some prep for that. That's the trial. Yeah, I didn't know that was coming. Well, let me see. I do have a soft spot for Gödel Escher Bach, this book about AI and what is thought and so on that Doug Hofstadter wrote back in the 80s. I also have a soft spot for Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler, which is a textbook on general relativity.
Okay.
That's a good read, believe it or not.
Okay.
They have lots of nice little jokes in there as well as the math.
You have all these books, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah.
Of course. Silly question.
Let's see. 2001, the book, to go with my favorite movie. 2001: A Space Odyssey.
That's your favorite movie?
That's my favorite movie, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Surprising.
Because it really captures the vastness, the awesomeness of space, the silences, the slow motion. It's really, your generation, right, likes the zap, zap, bang, bang, nonstop action, right?
Yeah.
But that's actually not what space is like.
Yeah.
Right? And that may be what it's like in the airspace around Tatooine, but in our part of this galaxy, right? If you've seen like a shuttle docking or something like that, right, things go slowly.
Yeah, graceful.
Graceful and silent, and just vastness and beauty.
Right.
Right. And those are the sort of feelings and emotions that you get with space. And 2001 nailed that in a way
Right.
that no other movie I've seen has done.
So if you haven't seen it, take it from, astronomer extraordinaire. You got to watch 2001.
Other books, Good Omens, which is a book by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Hilariously funny book, and about the end of the world. And there's currently an Amazon Prime Amazon movie series about it.
Sorry, I'm distracted by someone saying that they don't believe the story about how I broke my leg. Well, why would I lie about that? Hi from New Jersey. I'm happy I found you live. Nice to chat with you, Alan, and I'm glad you're awake because you're also on the East Coast. Mark says, good evening, Ellie and Jonathan. Leafbinder says, my favorite movie is Serenity. I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, that is the movie that encaps the TV series Firefly.
Okay.
And I think if you put the one season of Firefly, criminal that they cancelled it, and the movie together as an ensemble, I would agree that is a pretty damn good series. I wouldn't quite put it at the level of 2001 or some of the other great movies, but I do have a soft spot for Serenity, yeah, and Summer Glau is always fun to watch.
Well, I hate to do this to you, but we do have a couple questions asking about aliens.
Okay.
I know you get asked about aliens a lot.
The answer's going to be the same.
For the press. Well, let's get your answer because people are really hot on that right now.
Okay, well, ask away. What's the question?
Well, they're wanting to know, let's see, I guess give us your, with the current events.
Oh, you're talking about like the stupid guy who's testifying in front of Congress claiming
one.
that, yes,
Yes.
okay. I mean, that it's always, notice that it's not, he's not saying he saw these aliens or he saw these artifacts. It's always his buddy who knows the inside, right, assured him that this was the case. And I mean, this comes up again and again. And it's a classic Washington Insider thing that the stories grow in the telling. And people who are on the inside and have clearances but who don't have the really deep clearances, right? They just have like the medium clearances. Love to impress their friends by the fact that they have inside knowledge and they tell these stories and they embellish a little bit. And then the next person tells it further out, and embellishes it some more. And so, yeah. So, no, I put absolutely no weight. I want to wait until the alien themselves is testifying in front of Congress. Then maybe I'll start to believe it. But no, I put no weight on that stuff at all.
I feel like you get inquiries a lot from the press about just aliens in general. So what are they typically asking you? Do they exist?
Well, that's right. So let me be clear. I don't think we're alone in the universe, right? I think that somewhere out in this vast universe, life has evolved, and maybe even intelligent life has evolved and is currently existing. I don't think they're close.
You don't think they're here in a
I
different
don't think
dimension,
they're here.
surveilling?
Right. I don't
Okay.
think. I think here's my standard answer to this. If they come, if they have interstellar travel, right, they're either gonna be like totally obvious about it. Right, it's like I say that the classic movie here, I think for me is Independence Day. Right, you're gonna have 10-mile diameter spaceships hovering over Washington D.C.
Oh,
It's
dear.
not gonna be subtle, right? Or they're gonna have these, and this is what our friend Avi Loeb is sort of pushing. They're gonna have these micro nano probes that are gonna have sensors on that are like so technically advanced that they...
Talking about like a Tic Tac, like what they refer to as the Tic Tac?
Maybe, I don't know.
Possibly?
Yes, I haven't heard.
What the
But-
Navy sees, the thing that's moving.
Oh no, I don't
No,
think
no.
that's real. But
Okay.
I'm saying you can imagine like in orbit or something,
Right.
or you could have a little spy satellite,
Yes.
alien spy satellite that is so small that no one would see it.
We won't
right?
notice it.
And we won't notice it.
I
And
see.
so my point is, they're going to be so advanced that if they don't want to be noticed, they won't be noticed.
Gotcha.
And if they do want to be noticed, it's not going to be by, a few guys out in the desert or something like that,
Right,
right?
right.
It's going to be really obvious. And and so I see no reason on the evidence, that we've seen so far to think that any of these weird things. So these things that you see, like the Tic Tac, on the
Yeah.
fighter plane sensors and so on, I'm convinced that they're all like hardware or software glitches in the sensors or reflections, or the classic thing is when someone actually sees something, is that they're misestimating how far away it is. And so your brain is convinced, and we get this, by the way, even for real spaceships, the SpaceX ones, right, that people see a rocket in the sky, and they completely are convinced that it's coming towards them when it's actually going away from them
Interesting.
because of perspective effects
Yeah.
and things like that. And they're very bad. Or these re-entering upper stages that are spinning where they're convinced that it's a couple miles away and really it's 80 miles away. Right, because they can't, their brain is sort of making certain assumptions about how big things must be. And so people are very bad, it turns out, at estimating, okay, this might actually be an insect close to my nose and not or it might be Venus in the background and not a UFO at medium distance, right?
Right.
And so I think, with all of these different ways of screwing up, there's none of the sort of stuff that's been put forward is remotely compelling to me to the point where I go, oh, I should really look into that more, because it's always, and someone made the good point. It's about the I think it might have been Mick West. It's about the low information zone. Have you heard about this idea? So the low information zone is, so often when you first see something, you're in the low information zone, you can't quite make out what it is, you need more detail, you need to get, and then you get closer, and say, oh, that's a cow,
Yeah.
right? Or that's a truck or something, right? And then you're in the high information zone. You've got a lot of data on it, and you've got enough data that your uncertainties shrink,
Right.
and you know what you've got,
Right.
So it's funny that the UFOs never leave the low information zone.
Nope.
Right, they're always there. They're always in the not quite enough information to be sure that you're actually seeing something. Right, and that's a clue that in fact there's nothing there to get excited about.
Well, couple of our guests here agree with you, and just wanted to say hi to some folks. Bill Paget says hi.
Oh,
Hello
hi, Bill.
to
Yeah.
you.
Roger Bach
Says The Expanse is worth watching. James
Yeah,
C.
The
Miles,
Expanse is a great show. Very well done.
James C. Miles says he worked on The Expanse while it was shot in Toronto.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
So-
Fabulous show. Yeah, and great books too. Yeah.
Pierce, you're behind, but you made it. So thank you for joining us here tonight. And I really like this question from Andy. Jonathan, what is your favorite way of describing to people how mind-bogglingly vast space is?
Right, exactly. And of course, he's referencing Douglas Adams, who famously said, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's nothing compared to space.
Yeah.
So it is hard to convey how enormous space is.
Yeah.
And I think the best way to do it is to talk about the light travel time that we do. We talk about light years and so on, and to imagine that you're in a spaceship that can travel at the speed of light. And so if let's get in the spaceship and we're going at the speed of light, right? And so we turn it on, and then we're going to start our first second of our journey by going 7 times around the Earth.
Okay.
And then the second of our journey,
Whoa.
we're most of the way to the moon. After a couple of seconds, we're well past the moon.
Oh, it's going pretty fast.
Right. After 8 minutes, we've passed the sun, the 93 million miles to the sun. Another 10 minutes or so and we're past Mars. An hour and we're out at Jupiter and Saturn. A few hours, so suppose we left at breakfast, right? And we didn't have to wait in the line for TSA and anything like that. So we got a good early start. And after like 4 or 5 hours, we're past Pluto. We wave at the New Horizons probe. Maybe by late evening, we pass the Voyagers.
Wow.
At the edge of the solar system. And then it's time for me to teach you more chess and play Monopoly and things like that, because it is 4 years till we get to Proxima Centauri, the nearest star. So the difference between the planets really nearby, mere billions of miles, and the stars it's just huge, right? And so 4 years later we pass the first star in our interstellar trip.
That's crazy.
And 26,000 years later, with our beards really long, we pass the center of our galaxy. And
26,000 years?
Yeah. And 2 million years later,
what?
We pass the Andromeda galaxy, which is the nearest one.
Well,
that's the problem, right? And I mean, if we go near the speed of light, though, not as much time passes for us. So I'm cheating a bit here. So, but 2 million years have passed on Earth by the time we get to Andromeda. And then the last object I wrote a paper on, the Quasar PG 407 plus 265, is I think about 8 billion light years away. So it's taken us, by the time we get there, 8 billion more years have passed on Earth, and the sun has become a red giant and all that. So yes.
Yeah, space is big.
Not only is space big, but I mean, like, even the distances to the stars is mind-bending. But then that's just to the nearest star. The distance to the rest of the galaxy is another level of mind-bending on top of that. And then the distance to distant galaxies and quasars is another level of ludicrous beyond that.
Yeah, okay. Wow. Let's see if you guys agree with that.
Another way of thinking about it is, if you look at the stars in the sky, often you'll hear people say, oh, the stars you see in the sky don't exist anymore because they've gone out because it's so long since the light. Well, nonsense. And nearly said a bad word. But you are seeing them as they were several hundred years ago. So if you look at the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades, you're seeing them as they were when Shakespeare was a kid. The light from them that's reaching us now left those stars then in the 1600s, 1500s.
So I like this question from Tin Man. If I was standing on one of the planets that we see the light from the distant past and was looking back at Earth, am I looking to my future or my past from my perspective?
Right, you're looking at our past, because at the same time, 400 if I'm on the Pleiades, right? The light that's leaving Earth now will not get to the Pleiades for another 400 years. So the light that's leaving Earth, the light that's arriving at the Pleiades now from Earth is a better way to say it. If you're on the Pleiades right now, the light that you're seeing from our sun left our sun at the same time when Shakespeare was alive. And so if you have a telescope and you're looking at the Earth, sitting in Maya or Pleione or one of these Pleiades stars, you're seeing the light from Shakespeare's Earth and not the light from today's Earth.
That's crazy. That's really, I know you're saying that, but it actually is really hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. Well, think about, the thing we have more experience with, right, is with sound, because sound speed is so much slower.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people, unlike me, spend time in sports stadia. And so they're used to the fact that they can tell from the loudspeaker at the far end of the stadium, right? The sound gets to you later than the sound from the speaker next to you.
Right.
Right? You've noticed that?
Yes.
And so that, or at a concert or something like that, same deal, right? So you can notice that essentially you're hearing the past.
Right.
Right? If you think about that, just by a couple seconds.
Yeah.
Right? But you're hearing the past when you hear something that's come from a long way away, because sound travels at a finite speed.
Yes.
And so if you hear, and the same thing when a lightning storm, we had a lightning storm yesterday, and the you see the flash of light, right, almost right away because it's traveling at the speed of light, but then you wait, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
and the thunderclap reaches you later. So that thunderclap happened at the same time as the lightning flash.
Right.
But you hear it later, so you're hearing the past.
Or even a rocket launch.
Right? Same with a
That's
rocket
why
launch, right?
sometimes
I
that's-
forgot on this audience. That's a more familiar everyday thing. Yes, when you're at the Cape and you see a
You
launch.
can forget to turn around until you hear it, and you're like, ah.
Yep. And so we're used to hearing the past.
Yeah,
Right?
okay.
And so it's just the same thing.
Ah, that is helpful.
Yeah. And so when I see you, I'm actually not seeing you as you are right now.
Oh, weird.
I'm seeing you as you were a billionth of a second ago, because the
okay.
light has taken that long to go. And obviously, you haven't aged a lot in that billionth of a second. So,
Yeah.
and so we're not used to thinking that way because on everyday scales, the time, how far we're looking in the past,
Yeah.
right? Even when we look at the moon, we're seeing the moon as it was only a second ago.
Right.
Right? And so, everyday stuff, we're not looking in the past far enough to really notice it.
Right.
But once you start talking about years or millions of years, right, that's a different story. But that's only when you get onto these huge distance scales of astronomy.
Did you think that, this is totally off topic. Did you think that by this point you would be able to look at the moon and see a civilization up there? Does it surprise you?
I don't know. I expected a civilization, but I did expect we'd be on Mars by now. When I was a kid watching the Apollo landings,
Yeah.
I thought there would have been a Mars landing by the early 21st century,
Right.
which seemed. Anyone else my age here, right? Didn't that seem like so far in the future, the 21st century? What a disappointment it's been. But
Really?
well, in some ways.
This guy is an inspiration. All right, Space Fan New Zealand thinks that you were an inspiration. S. Roger Bach says you're a fantastic teacher. I would agree with that.
Thank you.
That's why
Very
I always
kind.
reach out to you too much. Yeah. So we can only look back into the past. Interesting. It's crazy to me that we can see light, or at least infrared light, from the early universe.
Yes. I mean, that is a consequence, right, of most of the universe being transparent, which kind of, you sort of think about like empty space is transparent, right? But it's not quite empty. And in fact, in the very early universe, in the first 100,000 years or so, the universe was opaque. It was a fireball, right? And so what we see is light from the moment when the universe cooled down enough that the fireball became transparent. And so light rays that have been bouncing off electrons going whiz, 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 and not getting very far, suddenly there were no electrons to bounce off and it started going in straight lines, and it's been going in straight lines for the past 13 billion years till it hits our radio telescopes, and we can see the radiation from that moment when the Big Bang cooled and the universe became transparent, and that is incredible.
So mind-blowing.
And so we can see the fact that we can see out so far is sort of not immediately obvious, because it actually, the physics of the fact that the universe is transparent is sort of contingent on the very thin gas between the stars being, not too thick and not too neutral, and so on. So it is profound. I mean, one of the deep measurements of cosmology, right, is the fact that the sky is dark at night. And that's actually a paradox. It's a very old paradox that Halley of Halley's Comet fame realized back in the 1700s. And so it's called Olbers' paradox. Because of the rule that things never get named after the person who actually discovered them, but the person who best popularized them.
Yeah.
And so Olbers made this famous, and this is why is the sky dark at night? Because if you look in any direction, if the universe is full of stars, right?
Right.
Eventually, your line of sight is going to hit a star.
Yeah.
So why aren't you seeing light, right? And yeah, the star's going to be fainter if it's further away, but any given angle, right, is going to have more sky. So you're going to have more stars in that little angle, and that should cancel out. And it turns out that the reason the universe is dark at night is because it has a finite age. It's only 13 billion years old. And so the light from the most distant galaxies hasn't had time to get here yet. And that's actually a major cosmological result, right? That follows just from the fact that you look up and it's dark and not light in the sky.
Wow.
And so these questions of being able to see out in the universe in big distances actually are, in a way, really quite profound and have non-obvious ramifications.
Yeah. SMA's Sky, SMA's Sky says, speaking of the vastness of space, how do you feel about Starlink, covering the sky? Because we got, 4,500 active satellites right now?
Not great, Bob.
Yeah.
There's about 4,000 up now working. They're talking about 30,000. They're talking about, another 50,000 or so from different companies around the world, including China, and it's going to, potentially, it's going to change the night sky for everyone, and it's going to really impact ground-based astronomy. And I think it's now. Having said that, SpaceX have done a lot of work in making their satellites fainter. They've got some more work to do, but they're making good progress. So I'm more worried, in fact, about all these other companies that are launching these thousands and thousands of satellites. And I think the cumulative effect is going to be really bad. And I can see a time, maybe 10 years, maybe 30 years down the road, when you look up from a dark site at night and you're used to seeing all the stars and constellations, you'll actually see more moving things than stars. You'll see the visible satellites will outnumber the visible stars. And some of the simulations we've done of the planned constellations show that the planned stuff is getting really close to that. Even in terms of what's already been registered with the International Telecommunications Union and the FCC and so forth.
Well, and it's not just Starlink. We have, Project Kuiper on the way. We have OneWeb. We have other countries wanting to do similar low Earth orbit communications.
I just heard about another Chinese constellation. They have a big one called Guanwang.
Yeah.
There's another one called G60. A Chinese private company just put up a satellite that looks awfully like a copy of a Starlink satellite.
Right.
It's a flat panel with a similar design.
Well, and we were meeting with John Tilko earlier.
That's right.
Took a tour of MIT, and we were talking about China a little bit, and in particular methane, or you say methane, rockets, and kind of why a bunch of space companies are choosing methane, and also they recently had a pretty big milestone, correct?
Right, that's right. So there's been a race among various rocket companies to be the first methane-fueled rocket to reach orbit.
Yes.
And so, Relativity Space, your friends there, had a try. Starship, of course, had a try. There are a number of companies that are trying, but Galaxy Space in China were the people who actually did it. The Zhuque 2 rocket reached orbit a few weeks ago and became the first Methalox rocket to get to orbit. And so that just gives you a sense of the level of furious activity in the Chinese commercial space sector that's happening right now.
And why methane or methane?
Well, because it has has more oomph than kerosene, right? Higher specific impulse in the jargon. But it's not as fiendishly difficult to handle as liquid hydrogen, right? So liquid hydrogen is the smallest atom, and so it can leak out, as we discovered with the SLS. Although, as I was saying to you at lunch, the Europeans seem to have really learned how to handle liquid hydrogen very well. They don't seem to have these leak problems with the Ariane 5 that they just finished flying. So you know, I'm not convinced that hydrogen is so intractable. But people seem to feel that methane, which is a slightly bigger, you know, CH4, so it's got 16 protons instead of one, so it's a little, doesn't leak through things quite as easily. But also methane is the total global production of methane. You're not in danger of using it up. It's one of the most significant constituents of the atmosphere.
Right.
Right. I
Well,
mean,
in
you've got,
Mars, you know.
but even on Earth, you know,
Right.
following, you know, you've got like oxygen, nitrogen, and then you know a few other things, but methane's right up there, and you know natural gas, of course, and stuff like that. So it's abundant. We're not going to run out of it anytime soon. Whereas trying to get enough liquid hydrogen to fuel, say, a fleet of starships or something like that would actually, you know, be quite hard to do. It would really be stressing the system. So I think that's a good. And then as you alluded to, another long-term reason is that you can plausibly make your own methane rocket fuel on Mars, and so you can make your propellant in situ to get home, or to get to Earth if your home is on Mars. I guess I shouldn't say home.
Yeah.
Right? And so in the long term, that's a propellant that is, you know, applicable off Earth as well as on Earth, and so that could be a big winner. But in the short term, I think it's just the abundant availability of methane combined with its high specific impulse, its high miles per gallon, if you like.
Well, I want to talk about Mars for a second. You actually helped me review my relativity space tour that I will be releasing very soon. You guys know that's why I drove to California. And obviously they do the 3D printing of rockets, but why will 3D printing, you think it'll be important to have that capability on Mars?
I think so, yeah. I mean, what people underestimate for me in terms of settling the solar system is just the fact that I mean, it's one thing to have a settlement that you supply from Earth, but if you really want to be a multiplanetary species, right, you've got to be independent of Earth.
Yeah.
Right? And so you need to replicate our entire society on Mars, our entire industry. It's not enough to grow potatoes. You have to build semiconductor factories, right? And all kinds of other things, power plants, and you know heavy machinery and stuff like that. And so large-scale 3D printing much more portable, and that a portable civilization, I think, is a key concept that we have to push for, and that's where a lot of research needs to be done.
Well, Ross, thank you for joining us. You're always very, you know, helpful, and you participate a lot in these. So, you want to know what kind of payloads will be able to be launched on Starship, given the 9-meter fairing diameter that couldn't be launched in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so the things, really, what you want to do with that, right, is make satellites simpler. And so things that needed to be like origami folded up to fit in a small fairing and have all these deployments. The JWST telescope is an obvious case. Now you can just make unfolded and launch it unfolded in the fairing because it's got all the space. And so, but that's still a pretty big spacecraft, right? And so my concern is, I mean, that's still going to be expensive to build, even if the rocket launch were free, right? Building a big spacecraft is expensive. Not as expensive as if you have to make it unfold, so you're going to save some money there. But it's still going to be, say, a relatively small fraction of space missions that are going to be taking advantage of that, I think, because it's they're still going to be really expensive spacecraft.
Okay, I like this question from Andy. Is there any potential recovery from a Kessler syndrome event, or does that make space permanently inaccessible? Is that a point of no return?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, so I think I want to make the distinction right in low Earth orbit
Yeah.
between lower Leo and upper Leo.
Okay.
Lower Leo below 600 kilometers, there's a natural cleaning cycle of the solar maximum that we're going into right now, where the density of the atmosphere increases every 11 years, and things just fall out of the sky. They re-enter quite quickly. And so if you wait a couple solar cycles, your Kessler debris in the lower Leo will be cleaned out.
Okay.
And that includes the altitude regime where the space station is, for example. In the upper Leo, between 600 kilometers and 2,000 kilometers, it's going to take a lot longer, potentially centuries, to clean out the debris. And so there, yeah, you may have a situation where you can't really put constellations at that altitude, and if you want to go beyond, say to the moon and Mars, right, you're going to have to like have a lot of shielding and rush through that area of space really quickly to excuse me, to not get hit.
Yeah.
So I think that's the distinction. So we might not lose access to the lower low Earth orbit, but we might lose access to deeper space.
So, if you have a pair of identical twins on Earth, one of the twins spends a year on Mars, the other twin stays on Earth, will they be the same age when they reunite?
You know, the difference, right, is going to be milliseconds, right? It's not going to be like a year or something like that. But yeah, you are traveling at different speeds around the sun, and you're at different levels in the gravitational potential around the sun. And both of those facts change the rate at which time goes. And so, yeah, if you spend a year on Mars and come back, and your twin stayed on Earth, you will no longer be quite the same age. You will have experienced, and it depends on the details which way it goes, but it'll be like, you'll have experienced a couple of milliseconds less.
Wow.
But really, you know, who cares, right? It's these effects become significant only when you either travel near the speed of light or you go into a very strong gravitational field, by which I mean, you know, very near a black hole. And so if you do that, if you like skim near a black hole, not close enough to get sucked into the event horizon, but nearly, right, then you could come out and be like, you know, discover that 10 years has passed elsewhere while it's only been 10 minutes for you, or something like that, right? And so that's a real effect, and we know it's a real effect because we actually see it for real with elementary particles. The typical elementary particle, well, so if you have like a meson that decays, it has a half-life, right? It's radioactive and it has a half-life of, say, a millionth of a second. And so you expect if you fire a bunch of mesons and you wait 10 seconds, they're all going to have decayed, their radioactive half-lives. You'd be waiting many radioactive half-lives. But if they're traveling close enough to the speed of light, they haven't experienced that whole second. They've only experienced a few millionths of a second, and so they haven't decayed yet. And we actually see that in the accelerators, and in fact, we have to take it into account to get the right answers. Similarly, in fact, some colleagues of mine at the Center of Astrophysics, where we visited yesterday, put an atomic clock on a rocket and shot it up 10,000 kilometers and back down again, and compared it to a clock that they'd kept in the lab, and showed that it had experienced a different amount of time because of the gravity difference that it experienced. And that actually is an effect that it has to be taken into account in the atomic clocks on the GPS satellites, or they'd give the wrong answer. And so it's actually an engineering issue now. And so these effects are very real, but in everyday experience, they're usually very tiny.
Well, Zapfan wants to know, how do we synchronize time when we have people on Mars?
Right. Well, again, you know, the you do the math is the answer.
Yeah.
And so, yes, time runs at a different rate, but it's predictable and understandable.
Right, right.
And so what you do is you take an atomic clock to Mars, or a bunch of them, and you use that as your Martian time standard. And, over a long period of time, right, over 20 years, it'll be, a fraction of a second off from the Earth time standard. And that matters for accurate stuff. But you just correct for it then. You know what it is. And so, just like we were joking about the clocks downstairs, right? You have the clocks in the Mission Control Center that have Houston time, Moscow time,
Right.
Tokyo time, right? You'll have your Earth time clock and your Mars time clock, and they'll be almost identical, but maybe a second apart or
Right,
something
right.
like that. And so that's how we'll handle it.
Will the solar maximum affect Starlink launches in the next couple of years?
Absolutely. And they already have done, right? I mean, we lost a bunch of satellites because they didn't account for the geomagnetic storm, but it's part of the rise to solar maximum.
Right.
So basically what will happen, right, is that Starlink will have to use slightly higher initial parking orbits. And so more and more now they're using these two-burn launches on the Falcon 9, where after 10 minutes they're in a low parking orbit, and they used to deploy the satellites from that orbit in 15 minutes, but now they wait until the orbit gets to apogee, pulse the engines for 2 seconds, and raise the perigee so it's a somewhat higher orbit before they deploy the satellites. And that takes a little more gas, and so it costs them, they have to have 1 or 2 fewer satellites on the launch. Instead of 15, they might have 12 or something like that. And so that's how it affects things. Yeah. Plus, even in their operational orbits, they're going to have to use more fuel for station keeping. There's going to be more drag, and they have to counteract that more. And so it'll add cost, it'll add expense, it'll add operational stuff. But it's workable, right? It's just in the balance sheet.
Well, I do want to keep this to about another 10 minutes because, it is a little bit late here. But Ross has another question about Starship. What do you think will be a realistic launch cadence for Starship in the long term, assuming that SpaceX has operational launch pads at both Starbase in Texas and the Cape in Florida? I know Starship is your favorite.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah. No, you know.
They said that the space shuttle would be flying every 2 weeks. That never happened, right? So I don't think anyone knows. I don't think anyone knows what will be practical, right? In terms of, if you think about airliners and how airliners do maintenance checks after every so many flights and so on, that's the sort of thing that you only learn with practice. And we've seen that with Falcon 9. With Falcon 9, they used to do very thorough checkouts of the booster between each reuse. And now they've really, I think, got it down to a much finer art. And they know which things they have to check and which things they don't have to worry about. And at least for, however, the fleet leader or whatever, how many flights they've gone. And so I think it's something that you learn with experience and that you reduce, you improve the flight rate with experience because you kind of automate more and more of the checks. So I don't know. I mean, I would say just from range considerations and things like that, I don't see any reason why you can't do launches every couple of days, except that you're going to have, bad weather and things like that. And so maybe it'll average out to more like one every, 3 or 4 days from each launch site, from each pad. But that's only if you can get the maintenance and if you have enough payloads to be flying, right? There's also, often what happens is a payload has an issue in checkout, and so suddenly that launch is delayed a month. And so trying to keep the cadence going is not as easy as you think.
Robo Music, Rob Robomusic wants to know, I was blown away by your outstanding library of rocket launch data. Do you have a succession plan for it in the event that you are no longer able to look after it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That I mean, it's certainly a concern for me. I'm getting on a bit. And so, I mean, the default right now is I'm an employee of the Smithsonian Institution, and so the Smithsonian Archives, in principle, will get my stuff. Whether they'll take good enough care of it, we'll see. So I am interested in thinking through a plan for preserving this collection.
You can make a museum.
Yeah, if someone donates the money for the foundation,
Planet 4589.
Yeah.
You have.
I mean, that's the dream. The dream is to leave behind a museum with a foundation that would fund its continued existence, right? But I don't have that kind of pocket money. So if Jeff Bezos, if you're listening, this would be a good use of your money.
Yeah. So you guys help us get the message across.
So yeah. And beyond that, I'd love for someone as insane as I am to pick up the torch and try and continue documenting the space
calling all
experience.
crazies.
Yeah. I can't promise you wealth or anything really, but except grief and hard work.
You'll get a lot of books and you get a lot of binders.
Yeah. But it's been rewarding for me. So
yeah. Okay. Let's see.
I saw someone up there mention Patrick Moore.
Yes.
Which Ellie probably doesn't know.
Was Patrick Moore? Stephen wants to know a partial inspiration for your career. I do not know who that is.
He was a British television personality who was the astronomer who for many decades was the host of The Sky at Night on BBC TV. And he was a total nutcase. He was also really right-wing, actually. And he was sort of, all the TV comedians made fun of him because he was, like me, he was kind of, goofy and a bit crazy. But actually, no. I did meet Patrick on several occasions. He came to give a talk to the College Astro Club that I ran. So I've had drinks with Patrick, but he was certainly an interesting guy. Much bigger in person, very tall than he looked on TV, which is not normally the way around it is. Although Ellie is actually 7 feet tall, in fact. So, yeah, I was the other big popularizer in England around that time was Heather Cooper. I don't know if the person knows Heather, but she was also a strong personality and a television presenter. And she was a few years older than me, and I knew Heather and her friend Nigel from my days in college. And so she was definitely an inspiration for me. And then Carl Sagan was the other big inspiration, I guess, in terms of wanting to be a public science communicator and feeling the duty that the taxpayers paid for me to be able to do this great science, wanting to give back and wanting to help people understand why this is so cool and so interesting.
Well, Stokes Seeger says, this guy needs to be on Joe Rogan. Would you ever, if you were invited? Oh, geez. Oh, dear.
I don't think Joe and I would get along.
You wouldn't go, even if you got an invite?
I'd have to think about that.
What about Lex?
Who's Lex?
Lex Friedman.
Never heard. Oh, wait. Lex, Planetary Society? No.
He used to be at MIT.
Okay.
Deep Learning. He has a very successful podcast. I think you'd like him better than Joe Rogan.
I'm not in the podcast
I think you'd like him better than Joe Rogan. Okay, well let's pick maybe one more question here.
I can do a few more if you can.
Well, how successful do you expect small satellite launches from Saxaford Spaceport to become? Do you think there will be enough demand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure, and I think it remains to be seen how useful a range it is, right? Because you've got worries about how often will the weather be favorable, how hard will it be. So this spaceport that they're building is way out in the Shetland Islands, which is the middle of nowhere even by Scottish standards.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be a schlep to get out there. Is it really going to be attractive? Are any of the other UK spaceports under development? Spaceport Cornwall for air launched, of course. Virgin Orbit has gone bust. What's the other? And the one at Sutherland in the north of Scotland. There's a bunch of plans for spaceports in the UK, which I really like. As someone who grew up in the UK, I'd love to see orbital launches from the UK, but. I think it remains to be seen whether any of these projects will end up being practical.
Well, let's end on this question. Did Ellie get to look through telescopes on this trip? I didn't actually get to look through one, but I got to see one up close, which was still pretty cool. I have a video that I'm going to release.
We tried, but it was cloudy, so,
And it was potential raining if we're going to open it up.
So next time we'll make the clouds part.
But maybe we'll tell them so it was the 1916?
1912, yeah.
1912
the 1912 Alvin Clark refractor that we have here at Harvard, a 9-inch refractor.
Right.
And it's a beautiful old machine that is just great to look at Jupiter and Saturn through. So one day I'll get Ellie back here and we'll get to look through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say? One more round of chess before I hit the road?
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We just wanted to make sure to do a live stream because I promised one, but it is getting kind of late here. So thank you to everyone who watched, and I fly home tomorrow.